Our HOA president, a woman who ruled our neighborhood with an iron fist, fined my wife $500 for the ugly weeds growing in her garden. She gave us 72 hours to rip them out before she brought in a crew to destroy them for good. She laughed when my wife tried to explain. What that Karen didn't know was that these weren't weeds. They were a top-secret botanical project for the governor of the state, and her petty little fine was about to cost her HOA millions. There's a certain kind of peace you search for your entire life. For my wife, Eleanor, and me, we thought we'd finally found it in Maple Creek Estates. The name itself sounded like a promise of tranquility. It was a neighborhood of neatly manicured lawns, mature oak trees that formed a canopy over the streets, and a general sense of quiet order. It was the kind of place where you could hear wind chimes from 3 houses down. We bought our home, a modest but charming colonial with a decent-sized yard, with the dream of settling into a life of comfortable predictability. I work from home as a data analyst, so my world is one of numbers and patterns. Eleanor, on the other hand, lives in a world of soil, sunlight, and life. She's a horticulturalist. To most people, that just means she's good with plants. But it's so much more than that. She has degrees in botany and environmental science. She understands the secret language of the earth. She can look at a patch of dirt and see a universe of potential. Her hands, though often stained with soil, are more delicate and precise than a surgeon's. Our yard wasn't just going to be grass and a few flower beds. It was going to be her canvas. And for the first few months, it was pure bliss. We kept to ourselves, smiled at neighbors, and followed the HOA rules to the letter. We painted our trim the approved shade of heritage beige. We kept our lawn mowed to exactly 3 inches, and we never, ever left our recycling bin out past 6 p.m. on collection day. We were, for all intents and purposes, the perfect residents. The source of our neighborhood's pristine order was, of course, the Homeowners Association, presided over by a woman named Brenda. Brenda lived 2 houses down, in a home that looked like it had been freshly unwrapped from plastic that morning. Not a single blade of grass dared to defy her. She walked the neighborhood every morning and every evening, a clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning for infractions. She was the self-appointed queen of Maple Creek, and her word was law. We'd had only one interaction with her, a week after we moved in, when she'd left a laminated note on our door informing us that our welcome mat, which had a whimsical picture of a gnome, was not in keeping with the community's aesthetic standards. We replaced it with a plain brown one. It wasn't worth the fight. Eleanor had a special project she was excited about. Along the side of our house was a 10 by 20 foot patch of land that got the perfect mix of morning sun and afternoon shade. For weeks, she'd been preparing it. She'd tilled the soil, mixed in special compost, and tested the pH levels, with the focus of a research scientist. Then, one day, a small, temperature-controlled crate arrived. Inside were what looked, to my untrained eye, like a dozen scraggly, unimpressive little green shoots. They were delicate, almost pathetic-looking. She planted them with the utmost care, marking each one with a small, discreet wooden tag. "They don't look like much now, Mark," she told me, her face glowing with a quiet passion I adored. "But just wait. If we can get them to thrive here, it will be a miracle." She tended to those little plants every day. She watered them, checked them for pests, and seemed to whisper words of encouragement to them. They were her babies. The patch didn't look like a conventional garden. There were no bright marigolds or proud roses. It just looked like a patch of meticulously organized weeds. And that's when our trouble with Brenda truly began. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office when I saw Brenda on her evening patrol. She stopped directly in front of our house, her hands on her hips. Her gaze was fixed on Eleanor's special garden patch. I watched as she marched right up our driveway, her clipboard held like a weapon. I saw Eleanor, who was gently misting the plants, look up with a polite smile. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read the body language. Brenda was pointing, her gestures sharp and accusatory. Eleanor was trying to explain, her hands moving in a calm, placating way. After about 2 minutes, Brenda shook her head dismissively, made a sharp note on her clipboard, turned on her heel, and marched away. Eleanor came inside, her face troubled. "What was that about?" I asked. "Brenda," she sighed, rubbing her temples. She called my specimens a disgusting mess of weeds. She said they were a blight on the neighborhood and a clear violation of the bylaws regarding unkempt landscaping. Did you tell her what they are? I asked. I tried. Eleanor said, her voice filled with frustration. I started to explain that they were part of a very sensitive cultivation project, but she just cut me off. She said, I don't care what excuse you have. It looks like a weed patch, and it's coming out. Then she just walked off. I was furious. The arrogance of that woman was astounding. To dismiss my wife, an expert in her field, with such condescension was infuriating. But we figured it would blow over. Maybe she was just having a bad day. We were wrong. The next morning, tucked under our doormat, was a crisp, white envelope with the Maple Creek Estates HOA logo. Inside was a formal violation notice. It cited Bylaw 7, Section C. All residential lots must be maintained in a neat and aesthetically pleasing manner, free of weeds and overgrown vegetation. The notice stated that we had a severe infestation of noxious weeds and were being fined $100. It got worse. The fine would increase by $50 for every day the violation was not cured. And then came the final, chilling sentence. If the violation is not cured within 72 hours of this notice, the association reserves the right to hire a third-party landscaping service to remedy the issue at the homeowner's expense. They were threatening to rip out Eleanor's plants. This is insane, I said, the paper trembling in my hand. She can't be serious. She's serious, Mark. Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. This is what she does. She finds something she doesn't like, and she uses the bylaws like a hammer to smash it. We spent the next hour trying to reason. I called Brenda's number, which was listed on the HOA directory. It went straight to a full voicemail box. We walked over to her house and rang the doorbell. We could hear movement inside, but no one came to the door. We were being stonewalled. The 72-hour clock was ticking. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to some landscaping crew coming and destroying months of Eleanor's painstaking work. What do we do? I asked, feeling a sense of helpless rage. We can't let them touch those plants. Eleanor looked at the violation notice, then out the window at her garden. A look of steely resolve came over her face. There's a reason I've been so secretive about this project, Mark. I signed a non-disclosure agreement. But I think it's time I made a phone call. Brenda has pushed this too far. She's about to learn that some weeds have very powerful friends. I didn't know what she meant, but I trusted her. That evening, to buy us some time and show we weren't just ignoring them, I wrote a check for the initial $100 fine and included a letter respectfully requesting a formal appeal and a meeting with the board. I slid it through Brenda's mail slot. We received no response. The next day, another envelope was under our door. A second violation notice. The fine was now $150. The clock was still ticking. The third day was agonizing. Every time we heard a truck in the distance, we both tensed up. Eleanor spent most of the day sitting by the window, watching over her plants like a mother hen. I tried to work, but my focus was shot. I kept rereading the HOA bylaws, looking for a loophole, a technicality, anything we could use. But they were written with suffocating precision. Brenda and her board had all the power. Late in the afternoon on the third day, it happened. A large, noisy landscaping truck, the kind with a huge logo on the side that read Total Turf Taming, rumbled down our street and parked directly in front of our house. The passenger door opened, and out stepped Brenda, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face. She was holding her clipboard like a royal scepter. Two large men in dirty overalls got out of the truck, carrying rakes and shovels. This is it, I whispered. Eleanor stood up. She walked to the front door and opened it, stepping outside. I was right behind her. We walked down our path and stood directly in front of the garden patch, forming a human shield. Brenda, you can't do this, Eleanor said, her voice shaking slightly but full of conviction. Brenda let out a short, ugly laugh. Oh, I most certainly can, Eleanor. Your 72 hours are up. I gave you a chance to handle this yourself. Now it's out of your hands. Boys, she said, gesturing to the landscapers, clear out this whole patch. I want to see bare earth. The two men started to walk forward. I'm warning you, I said, my voice louder than I intended. You are not touching these plants. You will be held liable for any damages. Brenda scoffed. Damages? For what? A bunch of ugly weeds? Don't be ridiculous. Now move out of the way, before I have you cited for obstruction of official HOA business. It felt like a standoff in an old Western movie. Us, the desperate homesteaders, against the villainous land baroness and her hired goons. The landscapers looked a little uncomfortable, but they were clearly getting paid to do a job. They took another step forward, and then a sound cut through the tension. It was the gentle, melodic ringtone of Eleanor's phone. Everything seemed to stop for a second. Slowly, deliberately, Eleanor pulled her phone from her pocket. She looked at the screen, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She answered it. "Hello, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice suddenly calm and professional, completely devoid of the stress she'd been under moments before. The landscapers paused, looking at Brenda, who just rolled her eyes impatiently. "Yes, the conditions have been perfect," Eleanor continued into the phone, her eyes locked on Brenda's. "The specimens have taken to the soil beautifully." "Oh, he is. That's wonderful news. How far out is he?" 5 minutes. "Perfect. Yes, they're ready for inspection and initial transport. We'll be waiting for him. Thank you." She hung up the phone and slipped it back into her pocket. She looked at Brenda, whose smug expression was now replaced with a flicker of confusion. "You might want to tell your men to put down their shovels," Eleanor said, her voice as cool as ice. "The governor will be here in 5 minutes." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the perfectly manicured lawn across the street. Brenda's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, contemptuous scorn. "They the governor?" she sputtered, letting out a forced, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, that's rich. That's your play? You're bluffing. You think I'm going to fall for that? What's he going to do? Pardon your weeds." She turned to her landscapers. "I'm paying you by the hour. Get to work." The men hesitated, looking from Brenda to us. My heart was pounding in my chest. Had Eleanor been bluffing? Just as the bigger of the two men took a determined step forward and raised his shovel, a sleek, black SUV with tinted windows turned onto our street. It didn't look like a resident's car. It moved with a quiet authority. It slowed and pulled up directly behind the landscaping truck, blocking it in. The driver's door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit and an earpiece stepped out. He scanned the scene with professional eyes. Then, the rear passenger door opened. Out stepped Governor Richard Sterling. That he wasn't in a suit, but in a casual polo shirt and slacks, looking more like a friendly neighbor than the most powerful man in the state. He smiled warmly as he saw Eleanor. Brenda froze. The color drained from her face. Her jaw went slack, and the clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the pavement. The two landscapers looked like they'd just seen a ghost. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you," the governor said, walking right past Brenda as if she were a garden gnome and extending his hand to my wife. "Thompson here tells me the project is a resounding success." "It is, Governor," Eleanor replied, shaking his hand. "They've rooted beautifully. We had a bit of a local ordinance issue, but I think we're getting it sorted out." Her eyes flickered towards Brenda. The governor followed her gaze. He looked at Brenda, then at the landscapers with their shovels, then at the patch of weeds. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of sharp, serious concern. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. Brenda, finally finding her voice, stammered, "Gigi, Governor Sterling. I'm Brenda, the president of the HOA. I had no idea. We had a complaint about the weeds." The governor raised an eyebrow. He knelt down beside the garden patch, looking at the plants with an expert's eye. "Weeds?" he said, a dangerous edge to his voice. He pointed to one of the plants. "Do you know what this is, madam?" "This is Cypripedium reginae, the showy lady's slipper. It's a rare, protected species of native orchid. They are notoriously difficult to cultivate outside of their natural habitat." He stood up and faced Brenda directly. "For the past year, the state has been funding a highly sensitive botanical initiative to reintroduce these protected orchids to the gardens at the governor's mansion. We needed a master horticulturalist to cultivate them in a secure, private location during their most fragile stage. That master horticulturalist is Eleanor, your neighbor." He gestured to the patch. "This isn't a weed patch. This is a state-funded, environmentally critical conservation project. Each one of these specimens is, for all intents and purposes, state property. And you, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, we're about to destroy them with a shovel. The full weight of the situation crashed down on Brenda. She looked like she was going to be sick. The man in the suit, Mr. Thompson, stepped forward, his phone already in his hand. Governor, he said calmly, attempting to destroy protected native flora carries a state penalty of up to $10,000 per plant. Given that this is an official state project, I imagine the Attorney General's office would also be very interested in this. Very interested indeed, the governor said grimly. He then looked at me. And you, sir? Your property has been designated as a temporary state conservation site. This level of harassment from an HOA is unacceptable. That was all the cue I needed. I pulled out my own phone. Yes, hello? I need to speak to my lawyer, I said, loud enough for Brenda to hear. We're filing a lawsuit against the Maple Creek Estates HOA for targeted harassment, breach of covenant, and emotional distress. We'll also be seeking damages for interference with an official state project. Brenda let out a small, strangled gasp. The two landscapers had already backed away to their truck, wanting no part of this nuclear fallout. They looked terrified. The governor wasn't finished. He looked at Brenda with pure ice in his eyes. Your HOA's fine for my state's project is, of course, null and void. However, the fine that my state is about to levy against your HOA is very, very real. Thompson, get the AG on the phone. And get the State Environmental Protection Agency. As well, I want a full investigation into this HOA's practices. This kind of petty tyranny ends today. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the HOA. Within a week, the board was served with legal notices from our lawyer, the State Attorney General's office, and the EPA. The potential fines weren't in the hundreds or thousands. They were in the millions. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Suddenly, we weren't the weirdos with the weed patch. We were the quiet couple who were friends with the governor. An emergency HOA meeting was called. It was a standing room only affair. Brenda was forced to stand at the front and explain how her obsession with a patch of weeds had brought the entire community to the brink of financial ruin. She was voted out as president in a unanimous decision, a brutal and public humiliation. The remaining board members immediately moved to settle with us. Our lawyer was merciless. The HOA was forced to issue a public, written apology to every homeowner. They paid us a substantial settlement for damages and emotional distress, every penny of which Eleanor gleefully donated to the state's Botanical Gardens Fund. But the biggest change was to the bylaws. Under the threat of further state-level scrutiny, they were forced to rewrite dozens of the most draconian rules. The section on aesthetically pleasing landscaping was amended to specifically encourage the cultivation of native plants. Maple Creek was forced to become a little less sterile, a little more wild, a little more free. A few weeks later, Governor Sterling returned, this time with a small, professional team. They carefully, lovingly transplanted a portion of the now thriving orchids into special containers for their journey to the capital. He left several of the orchids in Eleanor's care as a permanent part of our garden. Today, that patch of land is the most beautiful part of our yard, filled with stunning, regal pink and white orchids. People from the neighborhood, even people we'd never spoken to before, often stopped to admire them. Brenda sold her house and moved away. We never heard from her again. Sometimes, standing there with Eleanor, looking at those beautiful, resilient flowers, I think about how close they came to being destroyed by ignorance and petty power. And I realize that sometimes, the most important battles are fought over the things that small-minded people dismiss as ugly weeds.